Welcome to Portals of Perception and to the Universalis Project, episode 19. I'm here with Kyriaki, Nikandrou, and Karen Heney. Welcome.
Hello, Karen. Hello, Aviv. Good to be with you.
Greetings to Aviv and Kyriaki, and it's good to be here.
Well, we actually just paused mid-flight episode 18. In episode 18, we framed what catalyzed the inquiry around the verification problem and the story that instigated that. We then spend a little time reflecting on the work you are each developing with different aspects of the Universalis project, and in a way internalized some of your discovering, both in terms of the content of the work and also about what is it that enables you to work. And in some way, you were seeding already in those comments some aspects of the verification systems in terms of the results that you're able to get. And I then brought several slides, which I will very quickly go through just to recapitulate and then lead into the natural integrated verification system of life, which is what I'm using as a working title, produced in the last 10 seconds for episode 19. So here is this slide. Okay, and we began by framing the scientific method, its 9 steps, instantiated it through an example, and then reflected on the significance of what the scientific method enabled, and also the shadow it created with the separation of exteriorizing credence only to the telescope and the microscope and leaving out the interior scope. So a lot more about that was covered in episode 18. And we then brought into the picture those 7 dimensions of knowing, or kind of knowing: empirical knowing, rational knowing, theoretical academic knowing, experiential knowing, procedural knowing, relational knowing. And we said all of these are helpful, and our inquiry is going to center on this idea of the integrated search for truth and knowledge, enabled and supported by the natural verification system of life. So that's the main focus of what we are about to explore. We also then, at the end of episode 18, articulated the appreciation and the discovery of why we are proposing that. Well, first, what is a third-person perspective? What is the nature of a fourth and the fifth-person perspective? And why we are proposing that those developments, those evolutionary capacities arising with human life, represent the seeding of the universalis human. And how inside this, when we give rise to the symphony and the symphonic orchestration of the multiple lives within, we also are permitting and enabling the universe to be awakened within us and through us to its cosmic symphony and its interior dimensions. And the invitation in this was that the universalis human is and is becoming the midwifery crucible for the birthing of the universe. So this is a very swift recapitulation of episode 18. Before I launch into the focus of the next phase of this discovery, let me bring your voices. What is it you'd want to offer as a bridging from episode 18 into the furthering of this inquiry about the verification problem and how we instantiate and verify knowledge? Please.
Well, just to say that the impulse of the human to understand how things work, the search for truth, the thirst to find the truth, it's such a primordial impulse and gravitational pull in the human. And maybe what a child knows is very different to what we know when we are, let's say, in our elder years. And what happens is that the whole life happens in the middle, that completely changes our perspective, our depth of wisdom, our value of things. And I think also maybe as humanity, we're slowly growing up. So there are different layers and levels of knowledge, and maybe we can access them. We can access them as long as we don't get arrested and identified and attached to what we previously knew. So this is what I would comment, and looking forward to the continuation.
Well, inside the contemplation that you offer, Kyriaki, about the human thirst for knowledge and for truth, and to understand how this universe is working, there is contained in that is the compound consideration and contemplation that this indeed is the propulsion of the human spirit. And as such, in the first place, it is the human desire to understand and get to know itself. What does it mean to be a human? And that at the same time with it, we can contemplate that what that spiritual drive is a representation of the universal urge of the universe itself to get to know itself. So when we say here that the universalis human is the point where we become joined to the co-creative act of the universe in its search to discover itself, to verify itself through the witnessing of our own experience, we're truly describing that universal impulse. So thank you for framing that contemplation. Please, Karen.
Yes, it's the two awarenesses that come together. One is that really this is showing that we're not going to look, or you're not framing, looking at the verification process from where we are. It's very much looking at it from a different perspective. But when it talks about the capacity to hold multiple perspectives, the human life that is in this domain is tethered to all these different perspectives. They're not separate, but they're not physically located where we are in one place, in one physical perspective. But it's this looking at something that is universal, but through the inner capacities that we are connected to, and creating these tethering filaments, connections, awarenesses, intuitions, the multiplicity that is available and finding the way of the accessibility to these different realms.
Which is where what we call the verification problem becomes the verification potential. And but I'd leave the word problem there as to just produce the necessary tension still, and to carry the recognition and the honoring that is where the inquiry arose, and that I have a task here to hold those threads of awareness we just integrated on the front end of this conversation, and to what I'm about to do next, share very practical and very concrete set of dimensions and verification processes. Okay, so with that, let us proceed into this, indeed, the integrated search for truth and knowledge. And what do we mean by saying enabled and supported by the natural verification system of life? Yeah, the shorter way of saying that is supported by life's verification. That's it. Life verifies you in what you do. That's an even shorter way of saying that. And there is something about the immediacy of that, because here is the point of awareness to start with. Anybody watching us and joining this journey, your life has been verified many times. Your capacity to sit and listen or watch or have question or respond or do anything really is a proof point that your life has verified itself time and time and time again, and build in you a system upon system, a layer upon layer, languishing, managing through life, and all those different layers, they each carry their own verification. And they are, in the bigger scheme of things, life's verification through you. So we each are a phenomenon that verifies life. So I'd say that at the beginning. Now, with that, what we are attempting to do here is to show that there is a way where we can bring science, spirituality, and philosophy together by sustaining distinctions and by generating a greater whole, and that in doing so, we are engaging the natural verification system of life, the greater natural verification of life. And what I'm about to do, I'm about to bring the focus to 5 dimensions, 5 processes, 5 domains, inside each of which there is a verification element, each of which we could take many hours to open up, and I will simply fly them at high altitude to name them, and I will instantiate 2 or 3 of these with examples, and we will leave 2 others for another time. Okay, so dimension 1 is the study of natural laws and how the universe works. And this is the one I will bring to life in a few minutes, after I first show the 5 processes, the 5 domains, the 5 verification elements that we bring into what we're describing as an integrated search for truth and knowledge. So the study of natural laws. What are the natural laws? How are they describing and manifesting the universe at work? And what might be involved in that study, and how that study itself could liberate a person into a greater, more potent verification of life in and through what you do. So that would be the main focus in a moment. Number two is the whole person orchestra engaging in a living inquiry application. So there's three elements in number two. The fact is, first is that we're talking about the whole person orchestra. So not just your head, but the inner lives and the many parts within you and the many systems within you. They are all engaged together. And it's the orchestral arrangement and orchestral feedback loop between those different parts. Your capacities, your sensitivities, your inner lives, senses, mental capacities, and all the dimensions of who we are as human beings engaging together. Dimension one in this part two or domain two in a specific living inquiry and its application. So there's two qualifiers here, which is you take a living inquiry. Living inquiry is what I have described before in the Universalis Project as permanent line inquiry. Something you live into time and again. You may be holding an inquiry, a contemplative inquiry for years and years and years, such that it works in you even when you're not thinking about it. It is so potently coded in your unconscious that it continues to work for you and would offer its yield on its time. And that you take this inquiry into a practical application. So I will instantiate that and give an example from my journey and how I applied this practice in building a thriving consulting business and how that became an opportunity to engage the whole person orchestra with a living inquiry and run an application practice inside it. So that would be the second dimension in the verification, integrated verification story we are developing. Number three, the verification of connected discoveries and improved personal results. And I will give an example for that. I will demonstrate how there is a way to evaluate and measure a whole loom of improved personal results. And that becomes part of the larger verification system. Now, you already, in a way, seeded that on the previous episode, on episode 18, when you were describing the interior work you're doing with the circles of friends you're working with in the Universalis elements that you're developing. When you talked, for example, about discovering that the work becomes concretized and embodied, discovering that it liberates yourself and others. That is an example of connected discoveries and improved personal results. Greater freedom, greater liberation, greater capacity would enter this loom of considerations. So that would be number three, and I would highlight that. Number four, which in a way we just described, is the verification of mutualized discoveries and improved collective results. So number three is the results you're getting by yourself, on yourself. Number four is the results you are catalyzing and encouraging with others. What is it that the truth or the knowledge you are decoding and the processes you are developing to enable it and to access it? How is it being experienced? How is it being accessed? How is it being confirmed and validated and verified by others? The example you gave for that in previous episode in number 18, Karen, was when you described how with the group you're working with, the fractals, sevenfold fractals of the epoch has become an embodied inquiry. So when you talk about red as the instigating inquiry about what are the reasons that motivate the work, and when you talk about orange as the expansion of that into a larger space of possibilities, it's no longer a concept. It is actually an energetic actuality experienced and verified by many people. In a similar way, Kyriaki, you were describing how working into the different layers of the blue operating system, bringing those to life, the actualization of that, and the fact that it can be tested and it works for a second person, for a third person, for a whole group of people, and it works also in a tertiary circle. So when they go to describe it to somebody else, so you have the transferability of knowledge and verification, and other people are able to get results. That is part of this verification system that we are describing. And finally, the verification of life and the enhancements of unseen realms and both visible and invisible blessings. And I'll see this now for a brief moment, and by saying that number 5, the point is that number 5 is enveloping or accompanying the work in 1, 2, 3, and 4. So when somebody says to me, we've been 7 hours on a global Zoom inquiry and search, and every hour it feels like we're completely refreshed and regenerated, and there is something that affords us stamina and endurance and vibrancy and capacity to absorb what, if you were just based in your brain, you'd fall asleep within 10, 20 minutes because there isn't enough space in the brain to hold it. But we have cultivated set of practices and way of being with this in flow where people are replenished and regenerated. They're describing one of the invisible enhancements that become a validation and verification of this process and of life itself. So that's the high-level framing of these 5, and I'm about to do deep dive into number 1 and the study of the natural laws. But let me just pause here and see if anything comes alive for you by absorbing for the first time these 5 dimensions of the integrated verification system. And I should say, it is said that on number 18, this is one day, this entire body of work emerged yesterday. It's 1 day old, but with 40 years of preparation. So there is no question that this is a mid-flight first rendering, and it will continue to evolve because this entire body of work is a running revelation that where one thing leads to another. And oh, by the way, this is one of its verification natures, that it continues to offer yield, and we don't seem to be in one mess big hysteria, because otherwise it would, when you are in one big mess hysteria, first of all, there are pathologies that would appear that are not appearing, but rather the opposite of that. And I will prove that when I talk about number 3. And I can assure you, we're not taking any substance to support us. This is completely naturally arising and is absolutely natural for the human system to be immersed in these possibilities and inquiries. And what we are seeking to essentially answer and describe and demonstrate here is an answer to the question, where is this knowledge sourced? What is it proposing? What can I expect? And can I trust the sources that are inspiring this work? And I am simply here disclosing or transparently describing the key elements that are part of this verification system, again, codified 24 hours ago for the first time, but with 40 or more than 40 years in the making. So please, anything you'd want to offer about this?
Well, it's wonderful. And I want to comment more on the verification of mutualized discoveries and improved collective results. Because that is a magical thing that happens often in our engagements with friends in the pods and in the epoch journey dynamic that we've been developing the last 5 years, where in speaking with another person, often, or with more people, it's like a whole new world comes alive that alone you wouldn't be able to birth or to access. So it's like we form together a kind of collective intelligence, a collective loom or a web where we each hold very strongly a node of this web that allows maybe the access to or provides a platform for a higher knowledge to land upon that. So I find this fascinating. And this happens again and again and again in such a way that it's undeniable. And it not only includes our friends, it includes other things as well, so that join. So I want to confirm that.
Indeed. So your last hint there relates again to the invisible and unseen realms that are blessing the human experience. Thank you, Kyriaki. Please, Karen.
Yes. Each of them I can say I've experienced in small, but the way this is being presented is I'm seeing it's like being at the edge of a precipice of something that I'm not quite getting, which is wonderful because it's bringing something new together. So though I can acknowledge and say yes to all of these, I'm also feeling something very new and very exciting in that newness. What I'll speak to briefly at the moment is number 3, which is the verification of connected discoveries, because that is something that I find phenomenal when you're having one thought and you're trying to work something out and understand. And somehow when you bring in other aspects of knowledge and understanding, there's a catalyst process and something new emerges. And the verification, which I have experienced in that, will arc to number 5, where there's almost an unseen confirmation of like a potency or a power. And I think, oh, wow, this is a thread that is valid. It has a validity and requires further deepening, exploring, and embodying if it kind of continues, if you can bring more awarenesses and experience and other faculties that add to the verification. So these are all interplaying with each other all the time. It's not you follow one and then another, but the the pathways, and actually this is arcing back to this multiplicity of these different facets that are almost giving birth to something as we progress. So in a strange way, I didn't know I was going to say that. So that's almost a verification live at this point of something going on.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So you're both describing how, in the first place, life itself verifies itself. Life and its continuance at the very foundational aspect of what life is and how life gets expressed is a verification process. It validates, confirms, reproduces, and evolves. And one of the ways we experience it in the most tangible way, and what you both said, and this is element of both 3 and 4, and how 5 presents itself in 3 and 4, is it gives you energy, gives you strength, right? So I'm kind of giving away now what number 3 is going to be about, and I still want to do first number 1 and number 2, but it's important to recognize that the reason we are codifying this is because we are dealing with the aftermath of 4 or 5 centuries where scientific rigor and scientific thought brought to us extraordinary gifts, but also left us bereft of the natural and separated us from the natural verification of the interior and subtle dimensions of life. And what we are seeking to do is not to lose or do away with scientific thinking, but actually to bring a scientific inquiry and be in the scientific experimentation of and the laboratory of our lives, and do so not just with our heads, but with the entirety of what the human system is, and unfold and unlock the possibility of these 5 dimensions. So let me now bring the focus to number 1. Naturally, we could spend a year or 3 years describing that and describing what the study of the natural laws and how the universe works. That would naturally be something that will require many, many sessions. But what I'm about to do is I'm about to bring to focus one aspect, one dimension, one of the natural laws, to instantiate what do we mean by the natural laws and to bring it to life. So the study of the natural laws is what often in other places will be called the esoteric quest. The esoteric inquiry, the esoteric quest is the search to find the natural governing principles of all that life is. And in Current Openings, episode 21, I go into depth in re-articulating with David Price Francis what we articulated also in Current Openings number 1, the appreciation of the exoteric, mesoteric, and esoteric. And in fact, it was also brought to life in the conversation with Brendan in segment 2, where we explored esoteric Christianity. And that was part of the catalyzing trigger and invitation for us to more fully decode what a verification system is. So that said, let me now instantiate it. And what I'm actually going to bring for us to focus on is what is called the Threefold Trinitarian principle, the triangle principle, the law of 3. So these different names to the same idea, because different people call it in different ways. So most of what we explore, we often not use referential knowledge, but this is something that people can easily Google and search, and they will find that the Trinitarian idea is obviously a key precept of the Christian theology and the Christian faith. The law of three is something that is and was codified in this way by this name, by the work of Gurdjieff, who actually, the spark of that was something that I believe he inspired him from Sufi mysticism. And you can find the Trinitarian principle in literally every esoteric body of work, in mystery schools from the beginning of time. And the threefolding idea is something that appears with great significance in the work of Rudolf Steiner. And you will find anywhere you search in esoteric studies the principle of the triangle, spoken of in different ways, described with different names. And what I'm about to do is I'm about to bring on slide 21 examples, 21 representations of the triangle principle, the Trinitarian principle. And the interesting thing to observe as I do so is that they will not all describe the same phenomena. There are different expressions and different dimensions and different phenomenology that's playing out through different aspects of this. And all I'm attempting to do is to give an appetizer, because what I'm about to do in 15, 20 minutes, I spent 10 years of my life doing. Literally, not collecting 21 examples, but collecting thousands of examples, to a point that I couldn't see anything else but see the three in everything. And I will do all that, and then I will close the loop and close the parentheses and explain and describe how that is part and why that is part of the verification system rather than the verification problem. But we're still carrying the problem because we need to address the problem and unlock the potential of an integrated verification set of processes. Okay, so far so good? All right, so let's begin with number one. Well, number one we mentioned earlier in episode 18, the mystery of water. And what is it about water that can, with a change of temperature, become ice and become vapor? So there is the discovery, there is the scientific discovery of what is it about the molecular structure and formation that with the introduction of cold, temperature, or heat will reconfigure water in these three states. For our interest, the contemplation of the three states of water brings the awareness. One of the first expressions of the triangle principle, the Trinitarian principle, is the fact that it affords the same substance to experience three different states. Now, of course, being human, we know that we can be in many states. I can be agitated and upset. I can be cheerfully happy. I can be wistfully observant. I can be neutrally contemplating. I can experience love. I can experience disgust. I can experience all those different things. So I can experience a whole variety of states, and yet I am staying inside the one person that I am. So what is it we are learning from how the triangle principle, the Trinitarian principle, expressed itself through the three states of water? Well, we are learning that what actually transforms the state is the energetic dimension. There's different energy that is being brought into the molecular structure, and the different energetic state creates and delivers a different inner configuration in water. So I've just found the guidance that what shapes and what transforms my inner state is a change in energetic quality that transforms the inner configuration. Now, in normal circumstances, the way this work is done, we would press pause here and release a person to spend the next day or 2 or 3 just observing that phenomenology in themselves, where everything else I'm about to bring on the slide would actually take a person away from just pausing with the first expression proposed here. Because again, what we are inviting here, we are inviting an esoteric appreciation of the natural law, the law of three, the Trinitarian principle. And if you take it just as a piece of information on a slide, you'll be processing it as an exoteric information. Whereas if you took it inside in the way you're describing the work you're doing, with the elements you're developing in the Universalis Project, you take it to the mesoteric and the esoteric level, and it begins to transform you on the inside. So, but I promised 21 expressions, so I'm about to deliver. The second expression is past, present, and future. And the recognition that what is past, present, and future? You'd say it's the continuum of time. But when you begin to contemplate it, you recognize that there isn't really such a thing as past, present, and future. There is only present. And what the past is are presents that were left behind, moments of the present that were left behind. And what the future is are present moments that have yet to appear. So, but with it, you begin to contemplate that you are seeing the flow of time, or what we experience as time, or what we permit to appreciate as time. And that what that does is it brings us to the recognition that, okay, we can put these 3 markers, which we will call past, present, and future, but those are different names to the ever evolving, flowing, emanatory nature of the here and now, the present. And then you also reflect so that while the body can only ever be in this present moment, the mind can indeed turn around and reflect on the past, or the mind can turn forward and anticipate or desire something in the future. So there are several things we are discovering here. Again, we're discovering that there is one phenomenology with 3 expressions, and we're discovering that where it comes to your mind, it can either be focusing on the past, or it can be anticipating or desiring for the future, or we can ask the mind to be present in the here and now. So much of our pain and suffering in life arises when we focus on the past or focus on the future. And so much of the joy and the healing and the potential that opens for us is able to access us right here in this present moment. So once again, if this was a workshop modality, or if you were exposed to it at some other point in time in history, you'd be given an invitation to now go and contemplate for 40 days about the phenomenology of past, present, and future. But we said we will deliver more, so here we are. Now we bring conscious. I will accelerate it just a little bit, or else it will become too much. Conscious, semi-conscious, and unconscious. Well, what are those three categorization of experience? What is it that we are? Will we bring something and put it in front of ourselves to become conscious of it, and then we let it recede, and so we bring the consciousness to something else, and whatever was conscious before recedes into the semi-conscious. Like, for example, a few minutes ago, I spoke about the three states of water. Well, now I speak about it again, so I bring it back to consciousness. But other than that, it recedes to be in the background. It's semi-conscious. And then there is the significance of the unconscious. So we're describing here three vectors of both the mental process, but the process of life. And what these three vectors represent, they represent the process of how life emerges, because before something emerges, it is unconscious, because we don't know about it. But when it emerges, it begins to be conscious. And then whatever emerged can become a foundation for something else that will appear later, when that thing that emerged earlier becomes semi-conscious. We've said about the Portals project that we were going to let it lead us through the unconscious. That's one of the very first recordings. At the time, we knew very little about all that was going to unfold, but we allowed the semi-conscious to be permeated with those inquiries that brought these, here is the word, brought the validation, brought the verification of the reasons and the purposes of what it was that we embarked on. So that becomes a verification unto itself. Now, I will come back to conscious, semi-conscious, and unconscious, importantly in the soul work in the future. And I imagine it will make itself reappear with us in the Universalis Project. So I'll pause it there, and we are now beginning to see that there isn't just one phenomenology of three. The first described three states. The second, past, present, future, shows a continuum with three markers along a continuum. The third one describes a greater whole and the activation of three revolving vectors within that greater whole. Here is sample 4, which talks about carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen, CON, as the three building blocks of life. So indeed, one of the important phenomenologies of the triangle principle is seeing, discovering, decoding the three main components of something. So yeah, there are other ingredients, but yet when you look at the molecular structure of what constitutes protein that constitute organic life, you begin to see how these are the building blocks of life, which is so interesting because in the language we have so many important words that begin with CON: conversation, configuration, conundrum, and so many other words that begin with CON, and you wonder whether when you say these words, concern, right? When you say these words, is there a suggestion, is there an indication that they invite us to consider something that is central to the whole of life? Because it, right at the prefix of the word, constitutes the three building blocks of what life is. We addressed this briefly when we dealt in one of the soul events with the mystery of conscience and looked at the word conscience as C-O-N, science, and reframed conscience as the science of the building blocks of life. And that was a reframe to what conscience is before we unfolded the discovery that emerged in this inquiry, in that inquiry, about the three memories that constitute conscience. So, okay, so I've done 4. I have 17 more to go. They will now come faster. Okay, we understand that the atomic structure has those 3 natures, these 3 elements, the proton, the neutron, and the electron, and that the structure of the material world, material universe, wouldn't be balanced, wouldn't be able to hold together without those 3. And that what they demonstrate is they demonstrate one, for instance, not the totality, but one, for instance, of another expression, another dimension of the threefold principle, which is positive, neutral, and negative. And these being the 3 powers, the 3 forces, the 3 dimensions of life, and that they are also represented in your capacity to affirm, to deny, and to reconcile, which is also described in this idea of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And the beauty of this is, so the synthetic way of thinking, you'll find extensive reference for in philosophical inquiry and in Hegelian work. The affirming, denying, reconciling articulation was the central facet through which Gurdjieff expressed and demonstrated the law of 3. It's one way, as he then demonstrates how how these 3 forces he then demonstrates how these 3 forces and their interplay give rise to all facets of life. You could do it in this way. I could also do it through conscious, semi-conscious, and unconscious. The beauty of what I'm trying to present here is the interrelationship of those, because you could overlay conscious, semi-conscious, and unconscious on past, present, and future by demonstrating where your consciousness shifts and how that unlocks past, present, and future. And you could also bring that to positive, neutral, and negative, and to affirm, deny, and reconcile. So I'm obviously becoming a little more contained and not fully disclosing everything, not because it is a secret at all. You can work on all of it just because of the economy of time of trying to run through it and describe it. There is then this other phenomenology of the law of 3, the Trinitarian, the threefold principle, which we describe when we describe the vista in front of us. We describe left and right and space at the center, or above and below and in between, which becomes very important for us because this idea of as above, so below is verified in the all that is in between the above and the below, and how the above and the below, how those become interpenetrating realms. That's where the above as below becomes interesting, in that they actually, the above and the below, they become interpenetrating spheres and spaces. So all that is latent in the discovery of the threefold principle. Then add to it another whole other dimension of the phenomenology of three, the mother, the father, and the child. So in this case, we're looking at a different phenomenon of three. In this case, it's the unification of two that produce a third. Also exemplified in the idea of a circle, which is often a shape associated with a feminine principle, the line, which is a shape associated with the masculine principle, and how the combination of the two together produce a spiral, a moving spiral. So, and how the birthing of a spiral can be seen to be the furthering of these masculine and feminine principles when they work together, indicating and suggesting that one of the core phenomenologies of the triangle principle is indeed the evolutionary process itself, and how the feminine and the masculine principle are co-creative and co-participative in unlocking the spiral of life, leading to appreciation of the cause, the process, and the result, seeing that these are three octaves of any phenomenology that we will observe, that something was an instigating cause and it led to a process, and the process leads to a result. I've done extensive work on this, which I don't think is yet recorded anywhere on a Portals conversation. So at one point in time in the future, we may choose to do so. The one thing that's interesting about that is you can ask any Olympic athlete what enabled them to perform create the results, produce the results they produce. They will tell you it's all about the process. So that's a generally known and appreciated phenomenology about the cause, process, and result. What is not often known is that when you ask them, okay, but what enables you to truly build the disciplines and the practices to evolve, to develop your process? And that leads to an inquiry about the cause. And then that the way to appreciate and serve the cause is by actually focusing on the result. The deeper you will proceed in this contemplation, it reveals that there is a huge, big difference. By working on results for results' sake, to working in service of a cause and producing results with that orientation, two very different states, talking about the different states that the Trinitarian principle bring to us. Okay, and we mentioned already exoteric, mesoteric, and esoteric. Another name for it is the outer, the inner of the inner, the inner sanctum of life. That would be the esoteric, and we're demonstrating how one principle is playing out through all the mesoteric realms in between the esoteric and the exoteric. And then the phenomenology of the awake and the sleep state and the liminal hypnagogic space in between. So that's, again, what I'm showing here, and I'm quite deliberately not bringing this in a hierarchy of the different expressions, but rather allowing those different expressions to rest one next to the other. In this case, the phenomenology represents two states in a transitory space, a transitory state in between those two states. It would be very interesting to look at that and bring into it conscious, semi-conscious, and unconscious, and other dimensions here. So there is so much to unlock in the interrelationship between those different expressions. of the threefold principle. And yet a whole other expression is the inhale, exhale, and I can be aware of my inhale. When I breathe in, I can be aware of the exhale. Then there is a way in this meditation to become present to the something else that is enabled by the inhale, exhale action. So in this case, the phenomenology of the three is we see a process in which there is an alternating current of two ends, two poles, and they produce a result. In this case, they produce sustenance and renewal. And we can observe in literally every living being, every living process, that they are forever seeking to find some kind of an equilibrium, but then that they are forever losing or giving away this equilibrium either into an increase or a decrease, and sometime into both. One thing is increasing and another thing is decreasing in the search for equilibrium. So we're describing practically the full universe of phenomena. There is nothing you could look at in life that would not demonstrate and reveal several dimensions of this threefolding. And when I spent years of my exploration with this, some 40 years ago, my early 20s, where the premise was to get to a point that will actually activate this principle in my life at the conscious, semi-conscious, and unconscious level, such that I could shift my state, such that I could be at a point of choice the embodiment of the positive or the negative or the neutral natures, such that I could direct my life by using the affirming, the denying, the reconciling force, such that I could harness these to produce the results I needed to do. When I did that, the premise was that once you engage your life in such a way, it will become a working principle in you. You're no longer studying the principle, you become the threefold in yourself, and it will yield and deliver its own verification and validation inside your process. And guess what? Will induct connective discoveries to your life. And such that anything you look at, anything you will travel into, that will be part of your support infrastructure. I will describe, when I circle back to dimension 2 of the integrated system, the living inquiry, I'll describe how when I enter the field of consulting work with leadership teams in some of the largest companies in the world, unbeknown to them, my approach was fueled and powered by that. So I did not study strategy in Yale or Harvard or Stanford, which is why it enabled me to, in a way, reframe and reinvent, as they would often describe to me. They would say, well, you've reinvented the strategy process. What you're doing is something very different to any other approach to strategy. Why? Because it was rooted in the way the universe works. The study of the natural laws and how the universe works is meant to liberate you, to tether you, to connect you to the natural unfolding process of life. So life becomes its verification through you. And let me just add a few more to complete this slide. Obviously, birth, life, and death, right? So we each came into this world through the moment of birth, and then we go through our life until we reach a point of death, which all of the spiritual teachings reveal to us or guide us to appreciate and believe is a change from this world to another realm, and is a change of form. So There's so much to this because in some way every day has a birth in the life and the death of the day, and potentially every moment and every conversation is an expression of that. And there are things in us that can birth at any moment. And there are also elements that can die. So there is so much to be in that contemplation. In the East, there are various disciplines and practices that invite you to spend the entirety of your life in contemplating the moment of your death. The premise is that's the ultimate finality of life, so you want to show up prepared for it, and you want to absorb the actuality of death while you're still alive. The Western approach shies away from that, so there is merit in both, and we're simply here neutrally observing the phenomenology of birth, life, and death. And then it is interesting to reflect. I just selected one, I could have selected many others, that Jefferson, who sketched the proclamation of we the people and the independence of the United States, was a student of the Enlightenment and was probably in his own way a student of the esoteric. And he knew that if you wanted to communicate something powerfully, you'd need to frame it in a threefold fashion. Why? Because whenever you frame a threefold message, it has resonance in the natural organic emergence of life, in the conscious, semi-conscious, and unconscious. So when you go into a marketing class and they teach you how to frame messages, they tell you to frame your messages in a threefold fashion because it has an impact. And they don't know why. Most of the time, they wouldn't have the esoteric know-how, but we are unfolding here the esoteric reason as to why. In any case, there was something powerful in framing life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's as though he was capturing the three dimensions of life. First, you're given a life, but then life is incomplete when you cannot discover your talent and your capacity, when you're liberated to be a free life. But even their life and liberty are incomplete if you cannot pursue happiness. And happiness in this sense is defined in the broader context of happiness, which itself can be articulated as a threefold articulation. What brings you happiness, what affords you meaning and significance. And then a third dimension that's often not generally appreciated, which is there are experiences and aspects of life that perhaps they won't make you happy. Perhaps they won't offer you the ultimate meaning you're searching for, but they will enrich your life with variety and difference and challenge, and they will make life interesting. So right there is a threefold consideration that is matching this idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I propose happiness in a more holistic way. And obviously, to integrate at the end the Hindu Trinity, the Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And since we call this in the beginning the Trinitarian principle, let's also integrate the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So what did I do? I just instantiated the first aspect in this system, the study of the natural law. And I'm about to do a much quicker run through 2 and 3, because we already seeded them. But let me see if there is anything you want to say about this before we progress to instantiate the next 2 dimensions. Again, a quick sample of addressing the verification problem. Because why and how it becomes part of the verification system is that at anything I will explore, anything I will research in the distant past or in the future or in between, this system is working in the background. So when I'm thinking about the sevenfold nature of the epoch, I am looking at the fractal of each of these through the lens of this threefolding principle, and through the conscious and the semi-conscious and the unconscious, and through the positive, the neutral, and the negative, and through the cause and the process and the result, and through the father, the mother, the father, and the child. So there is an inexhaustible field of validation. And when something doesn't make sense and it doesn't verify, great. Okay, so we have a way to update it and redirect it, because there is a field, a vast field of validation and verification that guides us how to recalculate the journey. Now, please.
Yes, I think it's extraordinary that I think each of these everyone can verify and has an experience of. But what is really profound is the different natures that they open up to. I think you called it phenomenologies that each have, which kind of gives a whole different deepening dimension in itself. But then the other fact, or the verification, is how they interplay, the matrix of how they work together. So there's like another dimensional overlay. And it's all based on something that can be verified. So there's like layers of verification that are unfolding. And I mean, in front of me, I have a bookcase full of pattern books from different cultures. And, just to name, the mandalas and the Islamic art and the Celtic art, the three and the triangle is at the core, along with how it works in the Islamic tradition. From, you talked about it, the circle, the line, and the spiral. And it's another overlay to bring in, because with the art aspect, you're introducing different types of knowledge again, because different people will access knowledge through visual and imagery and symbology, which is another insight within this. So
Indeed.
I'll leave that for the moment.
Indeed, and right there next to that, Karen, in music too. Not just in the visual art, but in music too, where the chord is a combination of three notes. They're very important. We experience something unique when, in a certain harmonic balance, when we hear a chord of three tones, which we cannot experience in the same way when we play only two tones, or when we play four tones. So there is something about the phenomenology of the three that is right there from the beginning of time. What we touched here are some of those, the three states, the continuum of three markers, the greater whole containing three vectors, the polarity, transcendence, and unification, and the union that give rise to a third, and so on and so forth. So yes, please, Kyriaki.
Yeah, this is fantastic. Three has also been my, in a way, obsession since childhood, I would say. So, yeah, we could go, just do a whole seminar on each one of these boxes and what they actually mean. about our state of consciousness. And I think there's a magic in the three that allows life and allows movement and allows balance, allows things to not explode or cancel or dominate each other. And in relation to knowledge, it was to bring a reference from Greek history. It was interesting that Pythia, the oracle lady in the Delphi, when she was going into a state of clairvoyance, she was standing on a tripod. And it's interesting that the tripod where she was standing on had three different legs. And what does that mean, maybe? And it's interesting, even just the vapor, the water and the ice, what does it mean for knowledge? Because you could say the vapor is when you stretch your mental filaments to everywhere and you research and you explore and you feel the whole room of what is. And then water is when maybe knowledge starts to melt in you, and it melts to reveal the ice, which is the core seeds and the core truths of where everything originates. So it's in the causative realms. So you could see it upside down as well. But thank you for offering this portal.
Well, so let us build on that, Kyriaki, and let us now go and build. I'm going to do this one rather swift. I'm going to talk for a bit about number 2, the whole person orchestra, engaging in a living inquiry application, although I already seeded it, and then I will do a quick run through the connected discoveries and especially improved personal results. Well, so as I said, when I parachuted to working with senior leadership teams in Silicon Valley and other large companies, international companies, one of the things that happened was that I was already immersed in this work for 3 decades. So it afforded me freedom. And I didn't come through the traditional path into working with leaders where somebody went to Harvard or Yale or Stanford and learned some interesting frameworks, which that can be interesting, but they are mostly in some of those conceptual theories that we described in the 7 ways of knowing in the previous episode and the beginning of this one. No, what I developed was rooted in those natural universal processes. So I must have developed in the 20 years more than 500 frameworks. Some of them were for one time. And out of those 5 or even 600 frameworks, about 50 or 60 became core. And we actually touched that in one of our early Universalis conversations, that process, what I described, what I was doing. But there is a whole range of frameworks that were rooted in this appreciation. There is the 3 pillars of trust, and there is working through the 3 propulsions of great companies, and there is working on the 3 flaws of your business. And one after another, people will tell me, it's very interesting that I'm unlocking profound discoveries and realizations by applying these processes. And partly because they were sourced, they were rooted in universal know-how. They were not something that somebody just made up on a piece of paper in front of them. And that became part of number 4, the verification of collective results. Because time and time again, people will tell me they're getting fantastical results. And, oh, by the way, I was in myself engaged in the process at 3 levels in myself, 3 octaves. At one level, I needed to accelerate financial freedom for my family. So I needed to produce results. And to do that, I needed to produce differentiated results with clients such that they will be prepared to pay handsomely. Because they knew that when I'm in the room, I will help them unlock their brilliance and their creativity, and I will help their organization become healthier and more effective. So at one level, I needed to produce results for them to produce the lucrative financial outcomes. At another level, I was testing this very idea that the natural laws can be translated into practical situations where people need to produce concrete results. It wasn't just about esoteric stuff. It was about practical stuff. It was about leading a business. It's about rallying organization to a shared sense of mission. It was about all those things. And the third octave I was engaged in myself was, could I do this inside an esoteric tethering in myself? In other words, could I walk into the realms of worldly power with people who have very large responsibilities, vast responsibilities with many, many thousands of people, where people deal with worldly power? Could I do that? Could I manage and navigate in this world without becoming subject to it? Could I do it and still be tethered in the higher motivation of human life, that in the bigger scheme of things, we're here in an evolutionary process? And the test for me was, could I deal in the exoteric, navigate the mesoteric, all while I'm esoterically tethered? Not compromise my integrity, not compromise the reasons, motivations, and be able to not lose the connective flow that enhanced my life. So that was the test. So I was doing, in a way, a test within a test within a test, because, and by the way, to be completely disclosed, I fell on my face 1,000,000 times, but I always was able to pick myself up. This is never... The esoteric life is not about being perfect. It's about taking yourself into the arena of experimentation and learning in the process. And the times I fell on my face and learned to pick myself up, they were critical verification processes. Because, so if somebody would come to me 25 years ago and say, what are you doing? What is the verification for this approach, for this modality? I was still in the early days of translating this. So I couldn't say what I can say today. But now, 25 years later, I can say that, well, it has proven itself that when you work out of the natural laws, when you build that interior verification system, when you become in yourself a natural law, the natural laws, they will enable you to play music differently, to hold a conversation differently, to support a friend differently, to raise a family and educate your children differently. And it's not that it will alleviate or remove the struggle and the pain. Sometimes it will make you struggle even more. Sometimes the pain would be even deeper, but you will have something that continues to sustain you from the natural verification and validation of life, the flow of life. So that's the point in number 2. And the specific example I brought from building a consulting practice is to demonstrate that number 2 specifically involves not just holding a living inquiry, but bringing that into a living application in the theater of life and testing yourself in that arena. Not everybody needs to do it in such a risky space as I have, but my temperament and nature has been to skate to the edge and to survive it somehow, to be able to tell the story of it later. So that allows me the freedom to do what we're doing now. So with that, let me now bring number 3, the verification of connected discoveries and improved personal results, and then I'll make the space for you to comment on both. I'm going to do this rather swiftly. And here is the loom. I'm about to bring a range of dimensions, I think 16 dimensions here, of how the whole person living inquiry is able to is generating results that deliver specific improvements. And obviously, we're dealing with the inquiry of knowledge. So in the first place, you will be developing a vast field of knowledge. But now I want to bring these other elements, because the question is what validates and what verifies the knowledge. And each one of those on its own is insufficient, but together they represent a body of evidence, a body of verification that merits making that the third dimension in the fivefold integrated verification system of life. Okay, well, do you experience greater well-being? Do you experience greater well-being in a sustained way, not just a momentary improved well-being? My experience in life has been that, yeah, absolutely yes. Not without struggle, but struggle is just another something that produces well-being. So improved well-being is one first measure, is what you're doing, is the knowledge you are metabolizing. Are you able to indicate that the answers you are getting, the practices you are applying yourself to, do they produce well-being or do they diminish well-being? Do they make you feel and experience life with greater intactness right next to well-being, which is a nature and aspect of well-being? Or do they diminish your intactness? Fourthly, are you able to experience increased vitality? If increased vitality, as I shared earlier, somebody would say, we've been 7 hours in this exploration today and I feel like I just started. Well, what is it? What is this phenomenology? That's some kind of a validation. And then, do you find that it affords you the capacities to discover increasing harmony? That the inner voices in your orchestra, the different parts that naturally have tension and conflict, that they're able to find a greater space, a greater hall inside of which they can find harmony? And do they also, right next to the harmony, find greater creativity? Are you becoming more creative? Are you able to unlock, Karen, as you said earlier, a greater liberation and creativity? So that would be some important aspect to measure in terms of the verification and the validation of life. Do you find that what you're doing is leading you to greater harmony or to greater conflict, to greater creativity, or no, you're losing creativity, you're becoming dumber and more stale? These will be important questions to ask. And then, are you becoming more versatile in your capacities and capabilities? And are you also with it more resilient? Is there this bouncing back and even bouncing forward capacity that you are unlocking? And so these are adjacent spaces. They highlight different flavors, all of which are very important in a person's life. We're only here once. We experience life once. Can we describe an improvement in these elements And then, are you experiencing greater meaning, sense of meaning, and greater sense of hope? Very important. Very important. People can go through very, very difficult phases in their life and still preserve and regenerate meaning and hope. And that would be, in some ways, there are moments in life where that is the only measure there is. Do you still have hope? Can you still make meaning inside the confusion and the chaos and the struggle? And there isn't anything else but that validation. I've had many moments like this in my life. So I've gone through these phases. And then, as I described in the work I've done with leaders, am I able to catalyze improved and increased effectiveness and impact on myself, on the people around me, people I work with? That would be a very important measure. Can I have that validation, that verification? And yes, am I enjoying in my life greater mental flexibility and the humor that accompanies that? Or am I too morbidly serious about myself? I often come across a little intense and serious, I suppose. It's just part of my formative upbringing, but you haven't met me 20 or 30 years ago, or 40 years ago, where I didn't have the joy of humor accompanying my life as it does today. There's tremendous humor and joy in my life today that were not there 30 and 40 years ago, when I was struggling in the trenches, trying to make sense of it all. So, and of course, greater intelligence and perception. And then also, do you find that you're enjoying greater self-authoring agency? These are very important results to have in your personal life. And as you mentioned, Karen, freedom and liberation of latent capacities. Add to it the sense of connection and special abilities, and special capacities. And finally, the enhancement of the blessing realms and the invisible worlds with special energy and special inspiration. So I just placed these 16 here. I could probably place another 16, right? You could also do the reverse loom of you have less loneliness, less depression, less anxiety, less reactiveness, less confusion, less breakdown and dissipation of connection, less of the sense of overwhelm, all of which is part of number 3, the verification of connected discoveries and improved personal results. And the point we're making with number 4, we're not going to do number 4 and number 5, but point number 4, the mutualized discoveries will parallel almost everything that we described in element 3. So let me pause here. I said quite a bit in what I shared from the number 2 and number 3 here. What would you want to say to that comes alive for you to help us bring this home, please?
Well, I would say that all these are true. All these self-verifications, but I would challenge a little bit that concept that I believe all these come after some time. So I think the first steps towards knowledge, they are not easy. They, at least for me, my experience, is that there is a lot of struggle involved and uncertainty. Often there is pain, often there is loneliness. And sometimes you say ignorance is a bliss. I believe this is because knowledge, true knowledge, releases a power and awakens you in a different level of consciousness and power that you need to train yourself to be responsible of and to navigate and to regulate. So yes, of course there are results, but there's also a price to pay. That's also another element, and I believe we reach a certain level of knowledge when we are truly ready in these domains. I don't mean scientific knowledge or knowledge of that is available in the world. When we are really truly ready to hold it. So that's where I would land us with a question of how then do we make ourselves safe vessels for this kind of knowledge?
Yes, and I appreciate that you bring this awareness and, as you said, a bit of a natural resistance and challenge, which is needed because we live in times where people generally assume that if you can Google it and if you can now chat GPT it, you have it. But we're describing here knowledge that is not just knowledge that can be found by an AI search, because it's an interior and it's connected and it's product of a development journey, and it has its validation. And I think it's fair and important, Kyriaki, you alert us that there is a price. There's no free lunch in this universe. You either pay before lunch or during lunch or after lunch. So the universe is going to demand its payment in the form of work or anything. But even with that, there is a nuance about it, which is this is not an advertisement for pain's sake, or for suffering's sake. So everything needs further deliberation, because there are productive pains and struggles that produce an outcome, and there are struggles that don't lead to the yield unless you fashion them in your interiority to be something that you harvested inside a meaningful context. So a lot more to develop on that. Thank you. Please, Karen, what would you say? Bring us home.
I'll go back to the beginning. At the start, I talked about epoch having a purpose, and the journey to see, well, what does it involve? And if one aspect is to do with integration, with a universal integration with the interior, this journey and the elements, the last slide that you showed with the different natures and characterizations, which are, these were some of the elements that, so if we are in a purposeful epoch, what does it require? And I'm looking at all of these now and I'm thinking, these are all renewable, connective, vital elements for that journey. And the way that you've described this matrix of integration and verification is well, it's this overlay from that red purpose. When I moved into the orange and talked about, well, what are the capacities, what are the muscles we need to build and develop? And then the yellow is the alignment to that purpose. And somehow this journey has taken into that level and the many, many levels beyond. So it's the nature of integration of living these within our lives and the connectedness that I think is where in a stumbling sort of way I'm landing us today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Karen. So my closing comment to this would be the following, which is when I turn around and I look back at my journey to date, I realize that I have enjoyed exceptional results, personal results, results with other people, and practical results in the work I've been doing. And none of it came easy, as Kyriaki said. All of it had a price involved, and involved struggle. But what is more important for me in the context of the verification problem and the verification inquiry that we focused on today is that sometimes somebody would look at me from the outside and say, well, okay, you have a gift, you have a talent, and you've been lucky to be able to exercise the gift and the talent. And whilst that may be true, that's not how I experience it on the inside. That's the outside looking in. On the inside, I don't at all experience it like this. What I experience on the inside, and if somebody said, well, how would you say, what did you actually do in the 45 years of your adult life to enable you to speak with authority to everything that you're sharing in the Universalis Project, the soul work? I would say that the one differentiator is that I've paid attention. I've tried as hard as I could. I'm still trying hard to pay attention. I'm paying attention with care. I'm paying attention to the natural laws. I'm paying attention to the living inquiries in me. I'm paying attention to where I'm getting results and where I'm struggling and why. And I'm debriefing and decoding that. I'm paying attention to the results that the people around me that I work with get and where do they struggle. And I'm paying attention to the verification of life, the way life flows, and what is enhancing and what snatches away enhancement, and what offers blessings, and where are these blessings taken away. So in my book, and the distinction I'm making, because if somebody said, well, it's your gift, in a way they relegate this as well. It's something I can't do because I don't have your talent and gift. And that for me is annoying, because you have your gift and your talent and you won't do what I do, but you'll do what you do. And I've found in working with people that I am time and again as inspired and learn as much as I can from everybody around me. Sometimes a lot of the time they wouldn't know how I'm learning from them, but I'm observing, I'm paying attention. I'm in the life of attention paying as a core practice of what I do. So I'd say that in the final note, the PS, the postscript to the verification problem, let us all pay attention. I'm sure there will be a furtherance and an upgrade on what we just did, but this has been a fantastical experience, and fantastic because we've treated it as a running revelation. And thank you for coming along for the ride and turning on a dime in the last 24 hours from our plan. And we just produced these episode 18 and 19 straight in just a little more than 3 hours. a not bad day in the office. Thank you. To be continued.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Aviv. It's been a delight. Thank you. Till next.
Thank you, Aviv, and thank you, Kyriaki. It's been a great revelation, I think, today. Quite extraordinary.
Along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.